All right, so picture this, right? You come home after a long day and the locks on your door have been changed.
Oh, wow.
Or even worse, all your stuff is piled up on the curb.
Yeah, that's like everyone's nightmare.
It really is, and it happens, unfortunately.
It does.
It's a scary thought, and it makes you wonder what your landlord can and can't do when it comes to evictions. Like, how much power do they actually have?
Right.
And that's what we're diving deep into today: illegal evictions and tenants' rights.
We'll break down exactly what makes an eviction illegal, what rights tenants have in these situations, and what legal options are available to them if a landlord decides to, play fast and loose with the rules.
And most importantly, we'll give you some practical steps to protect yourself. We're coming at this from a tenant's perspective, focusing on your protections and what you can do if you find yourself in a tough spot with your landlord. If you are in Orange County, Riverside, San Diego, or Los Angeles, California, and you want some legal guidance, you can check out martinezlawcenter.com.
They specialize in tenant rights. So, our goal today is to clear up any confusion about this topic and give you the knowledge you need to feel empowered and know what to do if you're ever facing a potential illegal eviction.
Right, so let's cut to the chase. What exactly makes an eviction illegal?
Basically, an illegal eviction is when a landlord tries to kick a tenant out without going through the proper legal channels. They basically skip the whole court process and take matters into their own hands.
So no court involvement, that's a big red flag.
Huge red flag. There are actually quite a few things a landlord can't do, like changing the locks without any notice.
Right.
Totally illegal. And even more outrageous, imagine they just barge into your place and start throwing your stuff out while you're still living there.
That sounds so invasive.
That's a complete violation.
Is there anything else landlords try to pull?
Oh, yeah. Some landlords try to get you out by making the place unlivable. Like, they might shut off the water, electricity, even the gas. And then there's the intimidation factor. They might threaten you or even try to physically remove you.
That's awful.
It really is. And in some extreme cases, they've even been known to remove doors or windows, just like making the place impossible to live in.
So basically, a landlord can't just decide you need to go and then take extreme measures to force you out.
Exactly. The court system is there for a reason. It's to make sure things are done fairly and legally.
So to really understand what makes an eviction illegal, it's helpful to know what rights tenants have even during a legal eviction process, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that. What are some of those basic rights that protect tenants?
The first big one is the right to proper written notice. This means the landlord can't just spring an eviction on you out of nowhere. They have to give you a written notice stating their reasons.
How much notice do they have to give?
It really depends. It could be anywhere from 3 days to 90 days. It varies based on the reason for the eviction and what your local laws say. But no matter what, they have to give you some reasonable time to prepare.
That's crucial. It gives you time to figure out your options.
Absolutely. Another key right is the right to due process. This means you have the right to a court hearing where you can present your side of the story and defend yourself.
So it's not just a one-sided thing where the landlord gets to make all the decisions?
Not at all. You have a chance to fight back, present your evidence, and argue your case in front of a judge. This is where you can prove you paid your rent on time or that you didn't actually violate any lease terms.
So it's an important safeguard against unfair evictions. What else?
Well, even during a legal eviction, the landlord still has to keep the property in livable condition. They can't just neglect repairs and let the place fall apart because they're trying to get you out.
Right. Makes sense.
You're also protected against retaliation. This means the landlord can't try to evict you simply because you exercised your rights.
So if I report a safety hazard, they can't turn around and try to evict me for being a problem tenant.
Exactly. And finally, you have a right to privacy. This means the landlord can't just barge into your place whenever they feel like it. They need to give you proper notice before entering, unless it's a real emergency.
That's good to know. Now let's talk about why a landlord might even want to evict a tenant in the first place. I've heard the term just cause used a lot. What does that mean?
Just cause eviction laws are in place in many areas, and they basically mean the landlord can't just evict you for no reason. They need a valid legal reason to do so. These reasons are usually divided into at-fault and no-fault evictions.
Makes sense. What are some examples of at-fault reasons?
Well, the most common one is not paying rent. If you consistently fail to pay rent, the landlord has grounds to evict you.
Right.
Other reasons could include breaking the rules of your lease agreement, engaging in criminal activity on the property, or creating a nuisance for other tenants.
So it's basically about the tenant doing something wrong or not upholding their end of the agreement.
Exactly.
And what about no-fault evictions?
These are a bit different because it's not about the tenant doing something wrong. It's more about the landlord's plans for the property.
Okay, interesting.
For example, the landlord might want to move into the unit themselves, or they might have a family member who needs to live there.
Right, so it's their own personal reasons.
Right. Or they might want to renovate the property extensively, and it's easier to do that if the unit is empty.
Makes sense.
They could also decide to take the property off the rental market entirely, or they might have to vacate the unit because of a government order. So in these cases, it's not the tenant's fault.
So it's more about the landlord's situation or their plans for the property.
Exactly.
Now, let's say a tenant has been illegally evicted, like the landlord changed the locks or something. What can they actually do about it? What are their legal options?
They definitely have options. One big one is to file a civil lawsuit against the landlord. This allows them to seek compensation for the losses they've suffered because of the illegal eviction. This could include things like the cost of temporary housing, moving expenses, even compensation for emotional distress.
So they can get reimbursed for all the trouble they've gone through.
Exactly. And if they lost or damaged any property during the illegal eviction, they can seek compensation for that too.
Now, are there situations where the penalties for the landlord could be even more severe?
Definitely. If the landlord's actions were especially bad, like not only did they change the locks, but they also spread lies about the tenant to try to hurt their reputation, the tenant could potentially receive punitive damages on top of everything else.
Wow, so they could really hit the landlord where it hurts.
Absolutely. Punitive damages are meant to punish the landlord for their behavior and deter them and other landlords from doing something like that again.
Okay, so we've got the civil lawsuit option. What else?
For smaller claims, like if the damages are under $10,000 in California, tenants can often go to small claims court. This is generally a simpler, faster process than a full-blown lawsuit, and it's a good way to try to recover smaller expenses.
What if the tenant is worried about the landlord retaliating or continuing to harass them?
That's a valid concern. In those cases, the tenant can ask the court for a restraining order. This would legally prohibit the landlord from harassing the tenant or taking any further illegal actions against them.
That would definitely provide some peace of mind.
Definitely. And depending on the jurisdiction, a court might even order the landlord to let the tenant move back into the property, essentially undoing the illegal eviction.
So there are ways to get back into your home if you've been wrongfully kicked out.
Yes. And it's also important for tenants to know that they can report illegal evictions to local housing authorities or tenant advocacy groups. These organizations can often step in and help the tenant, provide guidance, and even take action against the landlord.
Sounds like there's a good support system out there for tenants. But I'm wondering, are there any time limits for taking these legal actions?
Yes, definitely. There are statutes of limitations, which basically mean there's a deadline for filing legal claims related to an illegal eviction. These deadlines vary depending on the type of claim and where you live.
Oh.
For example, in California, the deadline for a general wrongful eviction claim could be 1 to 3 years from when the eviction happened. But for personal injury claims, like if the illegal eviction caused emotional distress that required medical treatment, the deadline might only be 2 years. And for claims about the landlord breaking the lease agreement, the deadline could be as long as 4 years.
So it's really important to act quickly and not let too much time pass.
Absolutely. Don't delay if you think you have a case. Talk to a legal professional right away to make sure you don't miss those deadlines. It's kind of like returning something to a store. If you wait too long, they might not take it back.
That's a great analogy. Now, we've talked a lot about what tenants can do, but what about the landlords? What kind of consequences do they face if they do an illegal eviction?
Oh, they can get into some serious trouble. First of all, they could be ordered to pay the tenant a lot of money in damages. This could be 2 or 3 times the monthly rent, plus reimbursement for things like moving expenses and legal fees.
Yeah, that adds up fast.
It does. And housing authorities can also impose additional fines on them.
So there are financial penalties, anything else.
In some cases, they could even face criminal charges, especially if they used threats or violence during the illegal eviction.
So it's not just about money. They could actually face jail time.
It's possible, depending on the circumstances. And even if they don't go to jail, doing something like this can really hurt the reputation and make it harder for them to rent out properties or get loans in the future.
So it's really not worth it for landlords to try to cut corners.
Not at all. It's much better to follow the proper legal procedures.
Now let's talk about how tenants can protect themselves. What are some proactive steps they can take to avoid ending up in an illegal eviction situation?
Documentation is key. Keep copies of everything, your lease agreement, rent receipts, any communication with your landlord.
So basically, create a paper trail.
Exactly. And know your rights. Familiarize yourself with the tenant protection laws in your state and city. That way you'll know what's legal and what's not.
Makes sense.
And if your landlord ever accuses you of violating your lease or threatens eviction, respond promptly and in writing. Keep a copy of your response for your records. And don't be afraid to seek legal advice early on. If you think there's a problem brewing, talk to a tenant rights organization or a legal aid service. They can help you understand your options.
That's great advice. Any other tips?
Just a practical one. Try to pay your rent on time, even if you're having a dispute with your landlord. Falling behind on rent can give them a legitimate reason to start eviction proceedings.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Now, are there certain groups of tenants who might have extra protections?
Yes, absolutely. Seniors and people with disabilities often have stronger legal protections. This might include things like longer notice periods and special consideration for reasonable accommodations. And for low-income tenants, there are often emergency rental assistance programs that can help them avoid eviction if they're facing financial hardship.
That's good to know.
Also, during emergencies like a public health crisis, there might be temporary eviction moratoriums in place. These basically put a pause on all evictions, protecting everyone, regardless of their situation.
That makes sense.
And in some places, there are even right-to-counsel programs that provide free legal representation for low-income tenants facing eviction.
Wow, so there's a lot of support available for tenants who need it.
Yes, definitely.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember about illegal evictions and their rights as tenants?
If a landlord tries to force you out without a court order, it's probably illegal. Watch out for those sneaky tactics like changing locks or shutting off utilities. Remember, you have rights, even during a legal eviction process.
Right.
You have the right to proper notice, the right to defend yourself in court, and the right to a livable property.
Absolutely.
And if you are facing an illegal eviction, you have legal options. You can sue the landlord, seek a restraining order, and get help from housing authorities or tenant advocacy groups.
That's so important for tenants to remember.
It is. And don't forget about those deadlines for taking legal action. Don't wait too long to get help.
Good point.
And finally, be proactive. Document everything. Know your rights. And seek legal advice early on if you think there's a problem.
Those are all great tips. And for our listeners in Orange County, Riverside, San Diego, or Los Angeles, California, if you're dealing with an eviction or just want to learn more about your rights, check out martinezlawcenter.com. They specialize in tenant rights and can offer valuable information and assistance.
It's really fascinating to think about how understanding our rights as tenants can not only protect us individually, but also contribute to a fairer and more just housing system for everyone.
That's a great point. It's something for all of us to think about, how we can create a better housing landscape for everyone. Thanks for joining us for this important discussion about illegal eviction and tenant rights. We hope you found it informative and empowering.
Thanks for having me.
And remember, knowledge is power. The more you know about your rights, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.